corridors of power. In the corridors of power. In the corridors of power. In the house are games. They told us we should just wait. They told us we should just wait. In the corridors of power. At the top of the hour.
Welcome to Counterpunch Radio. My name is Rebecca Maria Goldschmidt. I'm sitting in for Eric Dreitzer. And Counterpunch is celebrating 30 years of independent journalism. So shout out to Counterpunch. And thanks for giving us the platform to talk today with Fatima and Alakaʻi. I want to plug Counterpunch Plus, CP Plus, which is Counterpunch's extra bonus content material. So if you offer a one-time donation or of $25 or more, or a monthly donation, you can have access to Counterpunch's bonus articles and regular columns, as well as the historical archive of Counterpunch, which is going back to 1993, I think, all of the newsletters and magazine issues that Counterpunch has published over the years. So shout out to Eric and Josh at Counterpunch. And we're going to get started today with our guests here from Hawaii. So I'd love to have everyone introduce yourselves as we get started, and going to get straight into it. So maybe Alakaʻi, go ahead. Welcome to Counterpunch Radio.
Aloha, mahalo for having me on. My name is Alakaʻi Kapānui. My family is from Kona, Hawaiʻi Island, but I was born and raised in Duwamish territory. And my pronouns are ʻoia, as our traditional language is not gendered. And I am the poʻo for Kona for Palestine. I work with Huliau on Nā Wahi Kapu and am working on some upcoming stuff for Pōhakuloa training area and the demilitarization of that space.
Thank you. Fatima, go ahead.
Aloha, my name is Fatima Abed. I am Puerto Rican and Palestinian. My pronouns are she, they. And I'm currently working on a project that takes me across the continental U.S. to find and uplift Palestinian and other activist voices and share them to Rise for Palestine, which is on Instagram. And I'm really grateful to be a part of this podcast today. Thank you.
Mahalo to both of you for joining me today. And yeah, I just want to thank you both and just kind of give both of you gratitude and just thanks for all of the work that you've done, not only for Hawaii and for Palestine, but just for the whole community. You know, I mean, I live in Japan and we've kind of tangentially been connected through our work with JVP. But it's just really an honor to get to sit with both of you and talk story a little bit. I know everyone's super busy all the time, but it's good for us to take the time to kind of reflect. So I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about the Hawaii state, the fake state of Hawaii ceasefire resolution that was passed back in April. And I know that was a very big deal because it was the first, you know, again, we can talk a little bit more later about why Hawaii is not a real state of the United States of America. But in terms of passing a ceasefire resolution, permanent ceasefire resolution on the state level, Hawaii was the first state to do that. So I'm wondering, maybe Fatima, you can talk us through a little bit about what that process was like and share a little bit about how you all managed to get that to happen.
Yeah, so it was a process. And I knew that as soon as October 7th happened, that we were going to need to act quickly. And the only way that I can think about doing that is, along with the protests that the other organizations have been doing, which have been amazing, we also needed something that might be like legally binding. And so I had no experience with politics. I did work at the Capitol briefly, but I worked from home and I did creative writing. for representatives. So I didn't actually know much about how all of that worked. So it was a learning curve. And I did have help. And I basically went in there and, my organization, along with JVP and other organizations, we lobbied, we talked to different representatives. Hawaii for Palestine did their rallies and also promoted the ceasefire resolution as well, promoted the community when it was time to testify, to actively testify. And honestly, the ceasefire resolution would not have passed had it not been for everybody who actually submitted testimony, who called their representatives. And so we had a ceasefire tool that we used that we tried to make convenient, where people can literally just click on it, and then it'll have a pre-written message, and it'll, as soon as you hit send, because your zip code is there, it'll go directly to the representatives that are in your area. And that we had, thousands and thousands of calls that went out that pressured representatives both in Senate and House, because 2 resolutions came out. So I do want to thank the representatives that actually were really touched by what was going on in Gaza and wanted to do something from the beginning. And that would be for House side, Representative Amy Peruso and Representative Sunny Ganaden. And I also want to shout out Representative Capella, who did write a resolution to try to bring back UNRWA. Unfortunately, that one was shot down, but she was the only person that actually spoke up when the ceasefire resolution was. Other than that, for Senate side, I would say Senator Shimabukuro introduced her own resolution before we even spoke to her. And that was the one that ultimately passed through the Senate as well. So it was because of these representatives that were not afraid to speak out, as well as the large support from the community, especially Native Hawaiian community. Understanding the impacts of colonialism and the fact that we could be there in solidarity. Unfortunately, it has to be under these circumstances. But it was very moving. It was touching. It was exhausting. And I do feel like I wish it would have gotten more attention, especially since this is the only state that has made an effort to show its true heart. Nobody else in any of the other colonized states have actually made an effort to do any of this and to get anything passed. And I would look online and I see all these videos of other representatives that say kill them all, and all these horrible things about the people in Palestine and Gaza. And it really touches me, and I'm so grateful that we were able to pass that ceasefire resolution in Hawaii, because it will be something that I would hope that Hawaii would feel proud of in the future, that they stood on the right side of history, that they did not follow the status quo of the other quote unquote states, that they showed that they were different because they have been colonized too. They have gone through this oppression. They're still going through this oppression. And I'm grateful for that impact. And I just hope that it will reach more people, because maybe it'll inspire other states to take action. States. But yeah, so that's pretty much it, really. Just grateful for all the support that we got. It was amazing.
Yeah, thanks, Fatima. I think the grassroots organizing in Hawaii, the organizations, the smaller orgs coming together as more coalitions and solidarity work in Hawaii really showed what's possible for something like this. That's a worldwide issue. It's an international issue that is also affecting Hawaii. I think there's maybe either of you could talk about the historical, or at least in the last couple of years, the relationship between Hawaii and Israel that's been kind of cemented into state law, that also is troubling, I think, to a lot of people in Hawaii who were wondering, well, why is Hawaii supporting Israel? Why does Hawaii have these relationships with Israeli organizations, with ties between the Israeli universities and the University of Hawaii. I think because the BDS movement has strengthened so much just in the past year, in the past 9 months, basically since October 7th, we saw the BDS situation playing out in Hawaii a little bit differently, and also kind of contributing to the ceasefire resolution. But I really think that came from like your guys's just on the ground work of organizing people and getting different organizations to get the word out to their people that this is something that affects Hawaii too. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that, Alakaʻi, if because maybe Big Island is also different than what was happening on Oahu and what was happening in Honolulu in the state legislature and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's actually a lot different on Hawaii Island. There's a lot. I mean, our communities are smaller, so there's always smaller turnouts. There's always like more tight knit groups, and it's actually like because there's no legislators over here. There's like court offices and courthouses, but we can't really go protest there because it wouldn't be targeted, right? So if we're looking at targeting like specific politicians, we need to find out their schedule and if they're even going to be in the courthouse. So there's a lot of back and forth and talking about like what those actions look like and like what the actual effect is, because we have a lot of very enthusiastic participation where they're like, oh, we want to go block a road. I'm like, okay, well, let's think about the effect and like what the goal of something like that is, or are we just angry, right? So if we're going to block a road, like what does that look like? Do we have a bail fund? Do we have legal observers? Do we have like everything set up, or are we just like going to go gung-ho? So it's a lot of talking people down and considering the actual effects of our actions. But as far as like militarism and the way that we look at things over here, I think it hits a little bit closer to home. There's only 2 military bases on Hawaii Island as opposed to Oahu, where there's like, I think it's like 33% of the entire land base is actually military occupation. So we don't have that like ratio over here, but like we look at Pōhakuloa training area. It's the largest live fire United States military base that's active, and it's the size of Guam, right? It's in the middle of our island, and it sits right on top of Pōhakuloa water aquifer, which actually distributes to the entire island, except for with maybe the districts of like Ka'u, which I think is protected by like Mauna Loa and the lava tubes there, and like maybe part of Puna is not as affected. But like Kona, we receive water from Pōhakuloa training area. Hilo side does as well, and like the Israeli occupying forces come over here during RIMPAC every 2 years. I think they declined in 2020 because of the ongoing pandemic, but they're over here and they're coming over here as far as I know, and to run military trainings and to use white phosphorus and all of that. So we've been talking about what actions we can take, and it's actually really difficult to like think of meaningful actions as far as like all that goes, just because Pōhakuloa training area is so isolated. It's in the middle of everything, but there's no like curbs, there's no foot traffic, there's no anything. So you really have to just like stand in front of the military base, and if there's no media coverage, it can be really dangerous.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's there's we're seeing people taking so many different avenues of action, especially for Palestine. We've seen these mass mobilizations. We have the students, we have the unions, we have, like you're saying, like gung ho people who are just taking action at their own will. We have people like Aaron Bushnell who are self-immolating and setting themselves on fire. We have such a range of actions that people have already employed, and yet unfortunately we're just still seeing so much devastation in Gaza and in the West Bank. And so it gets, I think we're all at a point where everyone's extremely frustrated. Like you're saying, you have to kind of talk people down from just like wanting to do the most extreme thing. And I think because Hawaii is a small community and, not everyone is supportive of Palestine, although we did see so much support coming out of the community. It is still difficult to block a freeway. There's already a ton of traffic already, right? Like to block a freeway,
Yeah.
everyone gets late for work. Like because it's small, we're talking about small places. It's not New York. It's not San Francisco or LA or something, right? So we have a different community relationship, I think, that people are trying to navigate, that maybe is hard for people to kind of comprehend. Yeah.
Mm.
And yeah, I think the RIMPAC thing, maybe we could talk a little bit more about that. Or maybe before we go in totally into RIMPAC, maybe we could talk a little bit more just about historically, the movement for Hawaiian sovereignty, how Kanaka Maoli have really been the force behind protecting the lands because it's their place and it's historically the place that they've taken care of. So maybe you want to talk a little bit about that, Alakaʻi.
Sure. I mean, the baseline is always January 17th, 1893. Yeah, that's the date of the beginning of our occupation and the illegal overthrow of our constitutional monarchy. And stemming from there, it was the Committee of Safety first with Lauren Thurston and Sanford Dole and like the sons of the missionaries that had come here to spread like colonial religion and that sort of thing and to save us from our savage ways. And then we go into they go from Committee of Safety, right, to the provisional government where Sanford Dole is elected as the president, into the Republic of Hawaii because they needed to shift into a more autonomous government and not be seen as a provisional government. And then once they were in the state of being the Republic of Hawaii, they were able to push for statehood. And so we shift from Republic of Hawaii into the Territory of Hawaii. And then from the territory, we're like officially considered a U.S. territory, but that was under the provisional government and these foreign, this foreign group of people that is ruling our lands. And then from territory, we shift into statehood in 1959. And we can go into like the whole like international legality of of that decision and what should have been on the ballot, what wasn't on the ballot. So when that option came up, it was to remain a territory, which was already like terrible for us Kanaka because it only allowed landowners to actually vote for anything. And there was all kinds of like rules and restrictions around cultural practice and what we could and couldn't do with our own lands and our own waters, or to become a state. And so the majority of people who were resistant to even being part of the U.S. Abstained entirely because neither of the options were desirable. And they weren't registered to vote because we weren't allowed if we weren't landholders. And most Kanaka are not landholders because we don't see land as something to be owned, but we see it as like a stewardship. So we wouldn't have our names on these land titles or anything else. And we've already been displaced at that point because we lost like 90% of our population in 65 years from the time of contact in 1949, where diseases are introduced, until the 1950s, we've gone from almost 1 million to under 40,000. So when you're talking about who voted for statehood, it's like, well, the US was running a propaganda campaign to get white Americans out here onto the islands. That way they'd outnumber us because we already had a low population. And then they were considered able to vote because they had land. And then from there, they're the ones voting for statehood. And then on the ballot should have been an option to be autonomous again, and that wasn't even there. So Kanaka have been fueling this sovereignty movement since the overthrow. And we see that in movements like Hui Aloha ʻŌiina, which is originally Ka'ahahui Hawaiʻi Aloha ʻŌiina, the Hawaiian Patriotic League, which was founded by Joseph Nā Wahi in 1897. And Hui Aloha ʻŌiina is still active. They were the ones that were responsible for the ku'e petitions and had almost 100% of the Kanaka population sign on to it and resist statehood. And we were successful. And then the United States, of course, buried the petition. But Hui Aloha ʻŌiina is still going. Like, I'm going to the central body meeting next month. Like, we're still fighting annexation. We're still fighting statehood. And we're working on resolutions. And I believe there are actually resolutions being introduced this year to stand in solidarity with Palestine, especially with Gaza, because we recognize illegal occupation and militarism and the way that global imperialism works. It's like, I think of all oppressed people, Hawaiians, Kanaka should understand the term illegal occupation more than anyone, because we've been at this for 131 years. And we've had a lot of ʻŌiwi, like Kanaka, show up and stand in solidarity, and we're still having those conversations within our own community of like, if we can back Kaho'olawe, if we can back the sovereignty movement, then we should be able to back the like Palestinian struggle and resistance as well. The two are so intrinsically tied together between the United States and the so-called state of Israel, right? Of like, we should be able to make those connections better than anyone.
Yeah, thank you for that just kind of quick walkthrough for listeners too who aren't that familiar with, Hawaii as a fake state. That was basically it right there. And I'm wondering, Fatima, like, how do you as a Palestinian kind of relate to that history and being in Hawaii, and what kind of overlaps do you see with the Palestinian resistance movement and the Palestinian, just history of resisting occupation and colonization and really what's a cultural and now just really straight up genocide. And it's happened to so many communities all over the world. And I'm just wondering how you see the relations between Palestine and Hawaii.
Well, it breaks my heart when so I knew some of the history of Hawaii from living here and for talking to Kanaka Maoli and trying to do my own research as much as I can if I'm going to be a guest in Hawaii. And I hear a lot of similarities between the colonization of Hawaii and also Puerto Rico. Being half Puerto Rican, I'm a New Yorican, so I grew up with my mom. So I grew up Puerto Rican. My dad moved back to West Bank later on, but for a long time, I was living in New York and New Jersey, and I was going back and forth to Puerto Rico, and the idea of the fact that it was a territory first. It's still a territory. But the idea that like the people in Puerto Rico are required to serve in the U.S. military. However, I believe they can't vote, or maybe they can vote now, but there was a time where they couldn't. They had no access to anything. And then think about how they're treated when there is a natural disaster, Hurricane Maria, things like that. So I wanted to just touch on that briefly because I hear a lot of people saying like, oh, Puerto Rico wants to be a state. Puerto Rico wants to be a state. what Alakaʻi said reminded me of that so much, because it's not that Puerto Rico and Puerto Ricans want to be a state. It's because being a territory, it gives them less rights, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they feel like they're cornered. And also too, and this goes for like Palestine as well, like Native people, they don't see land as like owning land. Like it's just like, that's a colonizer way of thinking. You buy land, you own land. And so, and that's a thing with Palestine that's been brought up a lot, where Israel can just go and take their land. The settlers go in and they take their land, they take their homes and everything like that, and they say it's because they don't own it. And I think that's a huge issue because I feel like indigenous people don't see the land in the same way that structures like the US and other places in Israel might see it as. And so that also takes away any rights and their sovereignty as well. And so, yeah, I see that connection in Hawaii, in Puerto Rico, in Palestine, and also in a lot of other nations where the Native people are oppressed. The Native Taínos were wiped out. There are still people who have like very distant Taíno blood in them, but they were killed off by disease, and by lack of resources because everything was taken from them. And so, what we're seeing in Palestine is basically it started with being a very slow genocide, and now it has escalated. But I just want to make it clear for anybody who's watching who isn't really familiar with the history of Palestine and the Nakba, but this genocide has actually been going on for many, many years, way before October 7th. And you never really hear about all of the Palestinians that are kidnapped and detained with no right to trial, with no reason. Palestinians that are just beaten on the street for no reason. You never hear about children being shot and detained, and you don't hear about what happens to the people of Palestine. You only hear about something when it happens to Israelis. And so that again, it's like another form of erasure. It's a culture death. It's showing people that brown lives matter less, and we only pay attention, or Western news or the world should only pay attention when it's a white person being murdered, when there's something happening to them. But all the years of our oppression never mattered. And so my dad is from West Bank. My dad, my sisters, my brother, my cousins, they're all over there. And I went for the first time to visit a few years ago. And, going for the first time, I experienced just in the airport in Ben Gurion, coming as an American citizen from Hawaii. I had blue and green hair at the time, piercings, tattoos. They found out I'm Palestinian. All of a sudden, they held me for 4 hours and then interrogated me. I was not afraid to go to Palestine, which, I mean, technically it's all Palestine, but I was not afraid to go to West Bank. I was more afraid to be in Israel. And that's what people don't understand. They think that Palestine is what you should be afraid of. You should be afraid of IOF. They are scared. They are some scary MFers, and they don't care who they kill. They don't care. I mean, a family member of mine that I communicate every now and then is living in an area where there's a lot of settlers. The settlers now have permission to carry around guns. And so she said, you'll see people on the street with a baby stroller and with a big machine gun strapped to them. Normal, like, I want to say normal people, but everybody in IOF everybody in Israel is required to serve in IOF. So they're actually all trained, military trained, even if they're not currently serving. You have girls on the beach in bikinis showing off their weapons. And so they actually have permission from the Israeli government to shoot people on sight if they feel threatened. And this includes hearing anybody speaking Arabic. So my family cannot go outside the house. Can you imagine being told you can't speak your own language in your own country, or you're going to get shot? You can't leave the house for a walk because you don't know if the next person walking down the street is going to shoot you. How do you live life like that? And it's always been an oppression, and it's always been, a slow genocide. But because of what has happened recently, it is escalated to a point where it has been, look at Gaza. I don't even know what to say about Gaza. I have absolutely no words. There is nothing that we can do that will save Gaza. All we can do now is try to take away the military, the IOF from Gaza, try to get that ceasefire. But we can't bring back all of those people that were murdered. And that land is destroyed. Palestinian people care so much for the land. Even though Gaza was oppressed and there's not much that they can do because Israelis, they controlled everything, but the people there, they tried to live the best that they could. Every time they got bombed, they rebuilt because that was their only home. That's all they had. And so it was beautiful. They made it beautiful. They made it that way. Now look at it. You have all of these people that are animal activists. I'm a vegan. I'm a Palestinian vegan. I'm an animal activist. And you have animal activists that are seeing what's going on with all of the animals being murdered and all of the people being killed. And all of a sudden, they're silent. And it's just like, okay, so you only care about animals if they're not living in an area where brown people live. I got it. Okay. And I do want to say, I want to bring that up because I know that's something that's not talked about a lot. And there is an organization called Sulala, and they are the only animal rescue in Gaza. And most of the volunteers were murdered. There's one guy who still runs it. And this guy is incredible. His name is Saeed. And he goes around and with dodging bombs and saving these animals. And still to this day, he does not have one bad thing to say about the occupation. He just prays for peace. And this is how we should look at the Palestinian people, and not as terrorists or everything that the news perceives us to be. We are grieving our land, our freedom, our people. And it's time that ends.
Thank you, Fatima. Yeah, it's just so immense. It's so immense. Thank you for sharing all this stuff about your family and the realities that people have to live under. And the question of the animals, I keep coming back to this because that's kind of one of the things that was like the root of my personal radicalization was animal rights. I'm also a longtime vegetarian, vegan, on and off since I was 13. So almost, 25 years. And I was really moved by something that I heard recently about RIMPAC as well, in terms of the amount of marine life that is going to be and already has been killed and has been allowed to be killed by the US Navy, that the Department of Defense has this sort of like numbers of animals that are sort of allowed to be killed in these issues. Or in RIMPAC, it's not an issue. It's a war games and a war training that happens, and I'm trying to tie this back a little bit to the concept of our own bodies as the land, our own bodies in relation to other animals and to other beings on the earth, and there's just nothing more just upsetting and depressing than seeing the world around us get destroyed, in many different ways, but to see it happen in these ways that are so horrendously violent and also so preventable. We do not need any of this. We don't need white phosphorus. We don't need any of these carpet bombs. We don't need to do the SyncX exercise. So, I can feel the pain and the devastation in all of these places. I mean, my family's from the Philippines, and even just last week they were bombing Kalinga in the Cordillera Mountains in the northern Philippines with white phosphorus as well. And so all of it is connected. And for those of us who come from lineages of colonization. And then I also have to say, my family is in Israel, and we are also IOF soldiers. And for a lot of us in the Philippines, a lot of us are in the Navy. So a lot of us, and I know there's a lot of Puerto Ricans in the US military, there's a lot of Kanaka in the US military and in the policing. So we're in these situations where our own people are also the ones perpetrating, and there's something very confusing and intense about that. And there's also, I think that's probably one of the reasons why we, as committed activists, have chosen this particular path. So I kind of wanted to bring it back to, it's Pride Month, talking about queerness, talking about body sovereignty, talking about the murdered and missing Indigenous women issue, about how this isn't only about the destruction of our land and the political question of, these state entities and the militaries that protect them, but how this also influences our own bodies and our own body sovereignty. So I don't know if anyone wants to jump in on that. I know, Alakaʻi, you were speaking on the panel just last week about MMIW. So maybe you want to share a little bit about that and how these
Yeah.
issues are impacting us.
Yeah. So I do want to clarify, I was helping to facilitate the Oceania MMIW panel. So I was actually making mamaki tea and handing it out and making sure that everyone was like they can be such triggering topics and very sensitive. So I was kind of just, helping to malama everybody. But I do want to point uh, emphasize what you're saying about like what happens to our kino, like our bodies in these like really traumatic and stressful environments. But it comes to a concept of like what happens above, so below, right? So we see bombing and like use of white phosphorus, depleted uranium and lead in Pōhakuloa. We see the building of telescopes on Mauna Kea and TMT. And all of these things happen above us in these like Wākea, like the realms of the gods, where Kanaka are not supposed to go. They trickle down, right? Primarily through our water, but through our wind. There's a village right below Pōhakuloa training area that deals with really intense asthmatic issues, and they never used to. But because they're downwind from the training area, they get the wind debris that has a lot of lead content in it. So we see these things that happen and they seem abstract, but they affect our natural environment. And then because we, like, as Kanaka, we understand that we're part of the environment, but we can directly see the impacts of these things happening in a place that we don't visit, but they still affect us and our bodies and our health, right? So especially with the lead, and that all comes downwind and people have trouble breathing. But then the military does testing and they say it's safe. And they I think a lot of people are unaware of what really happens in Pōhakuloa, but they drilled a well in 2015 and they tested it. And they had been hauling in drinking water from Wākea. And the idea was that they would have drinking water on site. So they drilled the well and they did the testing, and they never released the data to the public, but they are still hauling water from Waimea. And so it kind of is indicative of the water quality in Pōhakuloa training area, right? So, but then we know that that percolates down and goes into our drinking water in Kona, in Hilo, in Kohala, in Hamakua, right? So all of these communities are going to be directly affected by the trickle-down effect. And that has to do with body sovereignty. It's like, if I can't drink the water on my island, in my, like, my wahipana, like the places that my kupuna are from, that my ancestors are buried, then what am I to do? I cannot just go somewhere else because they're not the same places. Like, just being in the process of moving from Kona, that is very, very directly tied to my ohana, like even my family's name, Kapānui, it comes directly from Makai Kona area. And moving to Kalapana, like those places are not the same. The rains are different, the waters are different, the winds are different, the oceans are different. And so we cannot just leave these places and have the same lives, because everything changes. And so if these places are poisoned and we are no longer able to be there, then what are we to do? We're the people of this land, but if we cannot survive, then how do we care for a place? And how do we care for ourselves in those moments? And then with militarism, and all of this ties together, right? We see like all of the effects of RIMPAC and our Ho'ekanoa, like all of our sea life, and how that's so drastically affected. Like, if our waters are poisoned above and that's trickling down into our local ʻI'a, right? Our fish ponds, we cannot eat the fish from those places. We cannot feed ourselves and sustain ourselves if the water is poisoned. We can't drink the water, so why would the fish be able to either? And we see that very, very directly. There's a fish pond that I volunteer at just north of here called Kaloko, and they've done testing on the waters when Kilauea starts going off and the acidity rises, and there's like a different chemical composition, and we're able to tell when Kilauea is about to start going because of the correlation and the water quality from the volcanic activity. So everything in these islands is connected, and we as Kanaka, we understand that we're part of it, but we've been so disconnected by Western mindsets that I think we're finally starting to get back to it and seeing how we're directly affected. And really, really being able to start talking about the ways that we're affected, then like having studies done where we see the numbers in MMIW spike when the military is here, and we see the way that we can't drink the water in Kapukaki, right, on Oahu, and we see how the Navy is not handling that via the Oahu water protectors, and how that board is I think they announced that they weren't in support of the management board anymore. And then the politicians tried to walk it back and say that they never said that. So it's like a strange situation where the military claims that they feel unsafe, but they're still poisoning us. And so it's like, well, who's actually unsafe? And then yeah, it's just these convoluted situations, but all of it ties back into how we can actually take care of ourselves. Can we even do that? Because in 50 years, all of the toxicity that's up at Pōhakuloa is going to be down here. And there's millions of gallons of water being stolen every day in Kona because all of our water is underground. And so there's these aquifers that get pumped and drained, and all of it's going to come down from Pōhakuloa, and it's all going to be toxic. We're not going to be able to live here anymore. And so we have to address what's actually happening to our waters and what will happen to our bodies in that time, when that time comes. And it's better to stop it now, but got to convince everybody that it's in their best interest to actually address these issues right off the bat instead of like pushing it back because they're capitalists. They're making monetary gains off of the theft of our waters and the exploitation of the land. So you get into this concept of aloha ʻāina and malama ʻāina, and how do we take care of these things? And it is in everybody's best interest to actually care for the land and love the land, but you have to convince them of it first, which is like crazy to me. But anyway,
it is crazy to think that people just don't inherently understand like something, that's something so beautiful like the natural environment is something worth preserving just for the sake of its
yeah,
beauty, even if it's just for beauty alone, you know.
yeah,
And to think that, something like RIMPAC, which has been going on since the 70s, RIMPAC, I think, I was looking at pictures from 1971 or 72 of students, students protesting RIMPAC. And, to think that then something like Red Hill, since the 1940s, and the history just in the last 125 131 years, that a place as brilliant and beautiful and gorgeous as Hawaii has been, just in that short time frame, has changed so drastically. And the same for Palestine, like in Israel has a nuclear program. I study in Hiroshima, and I understand that nuclear contamination and nuclear waste is an infinite kind of contamination. And the fact that they're using depleted uranium at Pōhakuloa, even though Hawaii has sort of like a very hard and anti-nuclear kind of in their constitution, there's a lot of anti-nuclear phrasing, yet the military still has the possibility of using a lot of these kinds of weapons. So yeah, it's not looking good, unfortunately, but I think at the same time, what gives me hope and strength is just the idea that, the people have consistently been strong and sure-footed in their practice of aloha ʻāina and their commitment to the land. And the same goes for Palestine and all over in the Philippines, in the Cordillera, and in Guahan. And we just had FestPac, a big cultural festival that is also sponsored by the U.S. military and had volunteer support from the US military, but also brought all of the Pacific Island nations together. And there's a lot of, like also convoluted stuff, political stuff happening behind FestPac. But from being there and experiencing us a little bit of the festival and just seeing how related all of our cultures really are in our practice of weaving, with plant materials, in our practices of dance and music and all of these different things, all of the different
yeah,
native cultures of the Pacific and beyond. It that sort of gave me just kind of like, whoa, we are so deeply connected to each other, whether it is through this bullshit militaristic colonial concept of who that's been placed upon us. There's that, and then there's this like deeper sense of just humanity. I wonder, we could go on and on. I feel like we could go on and on about all of these things, but I wonder if there are any kind of like closing thoughts that you guys just have in terms of what's something that you really want people to walk away from this conversation to know, either about Palestine, about Hawaii, about the two places and their relationship and solidarity between the two peoples and places. Maybe Fatima, you want to share anything else that you had on your mind for today's conversation?
Um, yeah, so thank you guys both for sharing. Just awful. Ecocide is something that is definitely concerning across the board on oppressed nations, because indigenous people know how to take care of their land, and they care a lot about taking care of their land. People, animals, everything is connected, like Alakaʻi said. Drink the water. Just because I'm vegan doesn't mean that I believe that everybody should be vegan. A lot of indigenous people, they rely on the animals for sustenance, and they rely on hunting, and they rely on fishing. And so when, the waters are polluted, when, the animals are being killed, when everything is being toxic and poisoned, people cannot survive. So yeah, and then if the land is being bombed, then nothing can grow from it either. So we see that happening a lot in Gaza. Gaza, I doubt anything is going to be like, people are not going to be able to live there for many years after this. um because of the toxicity from all of the bombs. So I think that if anybody can take away anything from this conversation, at least on my end, um there was one thing I think we were going to bring up for Pride. So the one thing I want to bring up is pinkwashing and just demonizing Arabs in general. So there's this thing that is part of Israeli propaganda that goes around saying that, oh, if you are gay or queer in Palestine, they will murder you, which is absolute BS. Like, absolute BS. There are queer people that live in Palestine. People know that they're gay, and there's never an issue with that. Um, Nobody physically hurts or assaults another Palestinian person because of that. Um, I'm sure that, like, maybe it happens on occasion, just like it would happen in the US. You have people in the US, there's so many hate crimes against gay people here, but nobody demonizes that. So I would say that, like, I came out to my cousin recently. Um, and yeah, she had no idea. It was kind of funny. Kind of tricked her into it. I was doing an interview for her. I was interviewing her for something similar like this. And I brought up the pinkwashing thing, and she had never heard of it. And I said, hypothetically, what if I came out and said that I was queer? And she was just like, oh, I mean, not, she was, I would be surprised, but, like, nothing, like, whatever makes you happy. And then at the end of it, I just said to her, I was like, okay, well, I just want to tell you that, like, I actually am. And she's like, what? Like, when we got off of the video call, she called me through Instagram, and she's just like, oh my God, can we go back to that conversation? And I said, yeah. And so she's Muslim and born and raised in Palestine, everything like that. And she said to me, she goes, are you really gay? And I said, yeah. How do you feel about that? And she just started laughing, and she says, I'm happy if you're happy. And honestly, that's how most people in Palestine are. And I felt so grateful, because I can't even say how many people in the community that I've met here in the United States have been treated poorly for coming out to people that they love. And I cannot speak for every single Palestinian family, just like I can't speak for every family in the U.S. But what I can tell you is that um, Israel, they have a perception that they put out where they have a huge pride parade, and they make Israel seem as if they're so progressive. However, gay marriage is still very much illegal in Israel. People have to fly to Greece to get married. And so it's all for show. They are demonizing Palestinians, but they have no idea how Palestinians actually treat the people that they love. At the most, maybe they'll just be like, okay, well, we're gonna disown you. But that is no different than a lot of places, a lot of people here. They won't kill you. And that's when my cousin's like, they're not gonna murder you. She's like, and I brought that up. And she's like, people actually say that about us? And I was like, yeah. And she's like, oh my God, no, we wouldn't kill anybody. Like, she goes, there's gay people everywhere in Palestine, and nobody does anything. And so, like, and they're Muslim, some of them, and some of them are Christian. And you have to remember that there's so many different religions in Palestine, and also people who don't have religion in Palestine. And they're Palestinian. And, it just blows my mind. And you have Christian gay people in the US. So I just really wanted to bring that up because it's Pride Month, and I think it's important to say that we come in all kinds of religions, creeds, colors. Like I change my hair color frequently. We look all different ways, Palestinians, Palestinian queers. Yes, we exist. We are here. Um, and we are accepted and loved by our families, just like any other people would accept or not accept, but not definitely not murder. Um, somebody who came out to them. It is just exactly the same as the US, if not maybe even a little safer. Because at the most that they're gonna do, like I said, is they might just like say, okay, like, we're gonna disown you. But the worst that could happen in the US if you came out is that you would actually get murdered. So that is the main difference that I want to bring up. When Palestinians love, they love with all of their heart, even if it means letting go because they don't agree with something. They would never ever physically do harm to that person. So I just wanted to bring that to attention.
Thanks, Fatima. Yeah, that's such a key element. And the pink washing that Israel commits consistently it's just shameful. It's just shameful to use an entire community of people and entire, you know, life, people's lives to sort of prove some kind of progressiveness that is clearly just not true. Like you said earlier, like you can be as gay as you want, but if you're still murdering and arresting children or stealing, kicking in doors in the middle of the night to haul 7-year-olds away to prison without having any kind of reason, and you're wearing the gay flag on your shoulder, like that means nothing. So yeah, I really appreciate you bringing that up. It's such a key element of how Israel has consistently kind of, tried to erase its very clear crimes against humanity. And I think it's one of the most shameful things, and one of the ways that also is really keeps a hold on the Jewish community, especially the American Jewish community and the European Jewish communities and Australian Jewish communities. Like people really want to hold on to the fact that Israel is a democracy that is supportive of the LGBTQ plus community. And clearly we've seen all of the ways that that just means nothing in the current situation. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, Alakaʻi, do you want to add anything else either on that topic or anything else before we wrap it up?
Um, I mean, on that topic, I think it's really important what to add to what Fatima was saying of basically not monolithing people into one group. I know that is a huge struggle for Polynesians, and I know Kanaka tend to be left out of Polynesian things, and so like I do take a lot of issue with Festpac. I don't think it's really time to celebrate when we have so much. I think Festpac very much is a distraction because it's funded by the now we're gonna have RIMPAC, and so it puts all of these people in good. Now we're gonna like turn around and start bombing things and everything. But the idea of like remembering that peoples are not monoliths. Like there's so much diversity, obviously within the communities in Palestine, but also within the communities. There are people that are still stuck in like the very colonial conservative mindsets. They struggle with like their own like biases in Christianity and things that were introduced, right, of like homophobia and that kind of thing. But then there's a lot of movement towards being more accepting towards our Mahu. It's like we just are, you know. And there's people in certain groups that would not be accepting of that. But there's entire communities that are totally like that's just our state of existence, you know. So definitely like wanted to mention that as like a like Hawaii struggles with being accepting of our Mahu folks as well. But we're working on it. We're getting out of those mindsets and back into our like more traditional understanding and ike. But like as far as closing thoughts, like aloha ʻāina ʻōia is a concept that is prevalent here. The love of the land is like rooted in truth. And that concept can really be spread and utilized globally because imperialism is global and love of the land is also global. Like we are on one honua, right? One planet, and we are part of our environment, and we don't get to separate ourselves from that. And I think the more that we reroute and put ourselves back into traditional culture, the more we'll be able to reincorporate this concept of uh, like understanding that we are in reciprocity with our environment, and we have to malama that in order to malama ourselves. And I see people waking up to this, like the ideology, and it's really encouraging. But I'm just kind of like, okay, wake up a little bit faster. We're so close, and like fingers crossed that everyone can get on the same page, like in the next yesterday, you know.
Yeah, mahalo for that. I totally echo everything that you just said. It's like, yeah, we should have been done doing this already, but
Yeah,
welcome to the party. Everyone, welcome to the party. Yeah, and honestly, I think I owe a lot to Hawaii and my studies there and the people that I've met there and the relationships that just to the place itself, but to the people. And I learned a lot more about Filipino history, my own Ilocano, Pangasinense history, just being in Hawaii. And I think, so many of us are moving through different spaces. Fatima's not on Hawaii right now. I'm not either. But the lessons that we have learned and it's almost like a responsibility. It is a kuleana that I feel that I have to Hawaii Island because of the things that I learned there and to my own history of my own people and ancestors and other teachers that I've had in terms of learning about Palestine, in terms of decolonizing the things that we've learned growing up in the so-called United States of America as young queer people of color. Like we are just doing what we know to do best, and that is listening to other people who have gone down the path before us. So yeah, just shout out to all of the amazing activists who have already been doing this work, since the Kaho'olawe days, the PKO days, and Palestinian resistance movement, all of the past intifadas that have come before us. Like we are just in one long lineage that is continuously circling around and around in terms of people resisting imperialism, people resisting war, and people advocating for just truth and peace and justice. So yeah, I just really want to thank you both for all the work that you've been doing, and I hope you can find some time to get some rest and take care of yourselves and your families and everything like that too. It's not been easy. It's not been an easy 9 months, and it's not been an easy years of our lives necessarily, but I do feel a lot of hope in the solidarity that we've all been able to build at least in the past year or so together. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to continually just screwing militarization with the rest of you. Cancel RIMPAC, save Gaza, ceasefire now, like let's fucking do this. And yeah, just really grateful for both of you and your community's work. So let's just keep going. Mahalo.
Yeah,
yeah.
I just want to
Always.
say, I want to say I'm so grateful for like Kona for Palestine, and all of the neighbor island organizations that have been helping us. You guys are amazing. You're incredible. They were organizing before I even knew. Like Kensho, I'm going to bring up too, because I think she has been protesting for Palestine for a couple years now. So yeah,
Time.
like Neighbor
Yeah.
Islands, you guys have been on it. So I am really grateful. I'm so grateful because I know how dangerous it can be with your smaller numbers out there, and the people that I've heard about some of the confrontations from pro-Israelis and Zionists, and I worry about you guys, but just amazing. So I definitely wanted to say thank you. And also this weekend is Eid. So happy Eid
Mubarak.
to all the Muslims, and then also to there is some information on Rise for Palestine on Instagram if you'd like to watch interviews of some of the protesters at the encampments across the country, and also other interviews that will be posted as well. Just give us a follow. And again, very grateful for this opportunity and for hearing your stories, your voices. So thank you for sharing that with me.
Thanks, Fatima. Alakaʻi, do you want to plug any of the orgs you're working with or anything? Where can we find your work?
Oh, sure. I mean, Kona for Palestine, we always post our upcoming events and everything. I'm working on another teach-in, fingers crossed. So we've had 2 of those already. I'm working on the 3rd one, and then yeah, we do like boycott movement, stuff like that. We hand out free coffee every once in a while. So if you're on Hawaii Island, we'll be out front of Starbucks, handing out pamphlets and information, but also handing out locally sourced coffee from our coffee farmers in the area. And yeah, I can't plug too much because a lot of it is background stuff and I can't really talk about it, but
Kona
yeah.
for Palestine. Kona for Palestine, Hawaii for Palestine, and JVP Hawaii. Everyone check it out, follow, and support. And we're just grateful for everyone who's showed their support for Hawaiian sovereignty and for Palestinian liberation. So it's happening, and thank you all for your hard work to make it happen. All right,
Thank
thanks
you.
everyone. Mahalo. Thanks to Counterpunch Radio, and we will see you next time.